This is the beauty of being alone toward the end of summer. A dozen stray animals asleep on the porch in the shade of my feet, and the smell of leaves burning in another neighborhood. It's late morning and my forehead is alive with shadows. Some bats rock back and forth to the rhythm of my humming. The mimosa flutters with bees. This is a house of unwritten poems. This is where I am unborn. One more time. I can see many people smiling in the little windows. What a wonderful poet James Tate is. Stray animals. This is the beauty of being alone toward the end of summer. A dozen stray animals asleep on the porch in the shade of my feet, and the smell of leaves burning in another neighborhood. It's late morning and my forehead is alive with shadows. Some bats rock back and forth to the rhythm of my humming. The mimosa flutters with bees. This is a house of unwritten poems. This is where I am unborn. So let's take a comfortable seat. We're going to sit like Tate on the porch, not completely outside the house, but on the edge of wildness in this stray area. That's the Buddha in this poem. Let your hands fall onto your lap, face up if that's comfortable. Just relax the shoulders. Sometimes you have to do it twice. You have to let them fall and fall. Relaxing the muscles of your face. Letting it fall and fall a second time. And now just feeling the heat at the center of your forehead. The forehead comes into this poem. It's a little bit like the mimosa humming with bees. Just put your awareness there. And then follow your awareness down the vagus nerve to your heart. Suddenly now, this swarm of bees is there, buzzing softly at the level of the heart. Now that's the mimosa tree. And then softening the belly down into the belly. feeling it there. And when that happens, you don't have to tell yourself to deepen your breath. It's just going on. Just following that hum from the belly up into the lungs, filling with air. Then letting it fall again. Each time the mimosa tree gets a little bit taller, the breaths lengthen and lengthen. Feeling your feet flat on the earth. Relaxing the muscles of your calves and your thighs. Remembering to lengthen the neck just slightly. Straightening the back if you can. And there's a moment here where you don't have any story. It might have been a flash in the last 10 minutes. But that's the moment we're going to be talking about today. That little moment is a house of unwritten poems. It's the little gap between your thoughts. And you just want to look closer so that that gap widens. Stray animals. This is the beauty of being alone toward the end of summer. A dozen stray animals asleep on the porch in the shade of my feet, and the smell of leaves burning in another neighborhood. It's late morning and my forehead is alive with shadows. Some bats rock back and forth to the rhythm of my humming. The mimosa flutters with bees. This is a house of unwritten poems. This is where I am unborn. I chose this poem after a wonderful encounter with a small herd of deer that just passed over my property. It was on Monday or Tuesday. And they were leaping and playing and didn't care about or even acknowledge or know about the boundaries between my neighbor's yard and my yard and the street and the yard across the street. And not only did they pass without care with regard to those boundaries, but they welcomed me out onto my steps. I don't have a porch, but they welcomed me out onto my steps to watch them. And I felt this incredible joy at their leaping. I felt this incredible joy at their freedom. And deer are wild animals. This is how they live. This is who they are all the time. They have their own sense of home, and I can't begin to know because I'm not a deer. But their wildness has to do with the stories being very few and the freedom of the unfinished poem of life being very great. But this poem is called Stray Animals. And the difference between wild and stray is that one can be wild temporarily when they're stray. You know what I mean? And so these deers brought out the wildness in me temporarily. They made me astray for a moment. I walked out onto the edge of my property, my porch between the house and the wide world. And I had this experience that matched theirs: joy, leaping, freedom, and forgetting my stories. This is the stuff of Italo Calvino saying, whatever it is for you that is not inferno, give it space whenever you can. For me, it's this kind of experience. For me, it's poetry too. Poetry is about all of our stories, but it's also opening up widely and forgetting what we thought we knew was true and allowing the poem to come forth, that deep unconscious impulse to teach us what's real. So I just want us to be stray animals for a half an hour. James Tate was born in 1943. He died in 2015. He was a little bit like Emily Dickinson in the sense that he lived in Amherst, Massachusetts for a lot of his life, and he stayed there. There isn't a lot to his biography beyond the fact that he taught at UMass Amherst for many, 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 many years, and he wrote thousands of poems. And this poem is very Dickinsonian because it's about how his aloneness brings stray quality. His aloneness brings out this wildness in him temporarily. And you'll see in the poem that the figure turns into a god, specifically, not a god really, but something like the historical Buddha sitting in meditation. You have the forehead alive with shadows. It looks like something from an ancient icon. the bats rocking back and forth to the rhythm of my humming. It's almost as if he's creating the world by what he's looking at. And he's living in this house of consciousness, this house of unwritten poems. It's not a house of poems that he's already written, but a house full of potential, which is really the quality of the life of a Buddha. This is where I'm unborn, he says, and in that way it connects to Thich Nhat Hanh's idea of interbeing, codependent arising of things. But he called it interbeing. It's a wonderful way to think about that feature of Buddhist philosophy. Interbeing is the idea that nothing is ever born and nothing can die, because everything in this world of forms is made up of other things. Even my glass of water was made in the core of the sun. It goes back before the clouds and before the rain and before the oceans and before the earth. And as I drink it and it returns and returns and returns, it still goes back to that place even before the sun and before the previous sun and so on. Nothing is born or can ever die because all the parts are made up of other parts. And we can actually trace them back in meditation. And the last thing I wanted to say is that this is an oddly spiritual poem for James Tate. Most of his poems were absurdist. They were born out of the French symbolist tradition of 150 years ago. But this idea of this is where I am unborn is something that goes very deep, and you can't deny that this is a person who has temporarily become a Buddha. Mary Oliver wrote that all of her poems were subjected to three tests. One was, does it have a genuine body? The other is, does it have an honest energy? And the third is, does it have a spiritual purpose? And I like to talk to my students about what a spiritual purpose is. We mostly agree that the spiritual purpose is letting go to something larger than ourselves, devoting ourselves to something large, and acquiescing to the will of a higher power. And that's true. But I think in this one, the spirituality comes in allowing ourselves out to the edge of the wide world and becoming temporarily stray. And what that means is that you have to forget your stories. You have to forget what you think is true in order to apprehend what's real. That would be the spiritual purpose of this poem. And I love this figure. He's St. Francis, he's Buddha. There are so many figures like him. It's the house of unwritten poems that he emerges from. Your stray animals, one more time. This is the beauty of being alone toward the end of summer. A dozen stray animals asleep on the porch in the shade of my feet, and the smell of leaves burning in another neighborhood. It's late morning, and my forehead is alive with shadows. Some bats rock back and forth to the rhythm of my humming. The mimosa flutters with bees. This is a house of unwritten poems. This is where I am unborn. Let's fall backwards into it again. Straighten the back just a little bit if it's comfortable. Lengthen the neck. Soften the shoulders. Soften the belly. Soften the face. Everything's softening. What is it to be a Buddha? Thich Nhat Hanh says, a Buddha is simply someone who lives in peace, joy, and freedom, neither afraid of nor attached to anything. So in this last 10 minutes, I have one question. And the question is, what would it feel like if the next moment had no stories in it? And when I say stories, I mean seeds of the past that you've watered to expect things in the present. What if you stopped watering those stories? What if you stopped saying things like that never happened to someone like me? What if you stopped watering? I'll never be happy. I'll never be satisfied. What if you stopped watering? I have to do more because that's when they love me. What if you just strayed away from that just for the next 10 minutes? Deepening the breath. And now you're sitting like a Buddha. The little animals gathered at your feet, teaching you about wildness. And going back into that store consciousness where all those seeds are planted. What seeds will you water? Seeds of leaping, seeds of joy, seeds of freedom, seeds of understanding. You find your mind racing. Remember that that's the point of the meditation, returning to your awareness. But just to step back and watch it and know that that's not you. Thoughts, body, feelings, perceptions, scars the world has left on you, those aggregates are not to be grasped. If everyone you met was like a stray, how do you greet a stray? Where did you come from? What is it, dear one? As Thich Nhat Hanh says, dear one, what is it? Dear one, I'm here for you. I'm smiling now, just thinking of his voice saying those things. Just letting your breath return to a normal pattern. But bringing all of that softness out of the meditation with you. Stray animals. This is the beauty of being alone toward the end of summer. A dozen stray animals asleep on the porch in the shade of my feet, and the smell of leaves burning in another neighborhood. It is late morning, and my forehead is alive with shadows. Some bats rock back and forth to the rhythm of my humming. The mimosa flutters with bees. This is the house of unwritten poems. This is where I am unborn. Thank you, everyone. Thank you all who joined me from AWP. I see some of my friends who all must be in Kansas City right now.
Thank you, David. Darling David.
Thank you, Grace. Wonderful to see you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you. Thank you from Kansas City.
Hello, Kansas City.
Woohoo.
Bye-bye, everyone.